Hello, hello. Welcome to Common Censored. This is the show where we talk censored stories and people, sensible solutions, and common ground movements to fight and build.
And sometimes other stuff.
And that's the voice of the always amazing Eleanor Goldfield.
Not always amazing. Like 98% of the time.
The 98% amazing Eleanor Goldfield.
No, all of me is amazing 98% of the time. Not 98% of me.
The always amazing 98% of the time Eleanor Goldfield.
There you go.
Did I get it?
No, I think you still said the always amazing. It's like a Yogi Berra quote.
You're always amazing 98% of the time.
90% of pitching is half mental. Yeah. Or half of pitching is 90% mental. One of those two.
Exactly. Also, I am 99% Lee Camp.
Who's the other 1%?
The other 1% you don't want to know about. He is a sketchy dude. I host the show Redacted Tonight. Eleanor hosts the show Act Out. And together we do this podcast. And it's called Common Censored. And let's get into, as I said, this is what I said at the beginning of Redacted VIP, which will air in a couple of days, was I said, 2020 started off with a bang, but not like a... Oh, no, I didn't mean that.
Oh.
I just meant 20. I go 2020 started off with a bang, but not like a good kind, like a explosive diarrhea or something. I wasn't talking about
drone bomb.
Yeah, I wasn't talking about assassination.
Oh.
But you made that dark. Okay.
Well, that's my job. You're funny. I'm the person who ends up sitting alone at a party in the corner because no one wants to talk about morbid shit with me.
You act like you're like Wednesday Addams or something. Like all in black.
Kind of.
Like dyed your hair and you wear black lipstick.
See, I never went that far. And after seeing how my brother looked with black hair, I realized that I would never look good with black hair. So I've always kept the blonde. But I in all other ways.
Dark soul.
Sure.
That explains the voodoo doll that you slice up into shards. Okay, so let's get to this utterly insane and preposterous and scary and fucking terrifying assassination of this Iranian general. Now, if you watch all of our stuff, all of my stuff, all of Eleanor's stuff, you're going to hear a lot about this because we're going to talk about it in our shows. I just did a web exclusive on it, but we're hitting a lot of different angles. There's a fuckload to talk about. I mean, I think that at the end of the day, there's about 14 different angles, but they all point to how extremely horrific and criminal and fucked up U.S. imperialism is. And so basically, you could talk about this in 14 different ways, and all roads end there. I mean, is that how you feel about it?
All roads lead to the empire.
Yeah. So most of you listening already know the basics. General Qasem Soleimani. He is the people are calling him like the second most powerful leader in Iran.
Well, and in many ways more popular.
And more popular than the Ayatollah. And he was known for, one of the things that made him most known in the country was for his fight against ISIS. He had big successes against ISIS, which they call Daesh.
In Iraq and Syria.
Because ISIS was taking over large swaths of the area, and he led the fight against them. And supposedly the U.S. is also against ISIS, but of course our weapons somehow end up in their hands, and our moderate rebels somehow don't end up so moderate later on and join ISIS, and the military that we disbanded from Iraq when we invaded and killed 1 million of their people, somehow a lot of them ended up in ISIS, and it's funny how that works.
The general feeling is basically in that region that without Soleimani, Daesh, or aka ISIS, the Islamic extremists would have taken large parts of that region. So basically, and I believe it was the journalist Rania Khalek that said this is akin to Trump assassinating the guy who's responsible for ridding the region, or mostly ridding the region of like their version of the Nazis, like the Third Reich.
Right.
It's like you've basically killed that guy.
The Nazi hunter.
Right.
And so he was assassinated by a U.S. drone bomb, along with some high-level Iraqi military as well, at the Baghdad air base. And he was there, we now know, and this is the part that your mainstream media, I've never heard them mention. Well, one of the many parts. That your mainstream media will not mention. At least I haven't heard them mention it. I doubt they'll mention it. He was apparently there on a peace mission, basically. Iraq was acting as a mediator between, and this is what the Iraqi prime minister said, a mediator between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And there were some diplomatic salvos to meet and discuss and try and ease tensions between the two. And Soleimani was there to meet with the Iraqi prime minister and others and basically talk through them with Saudi Arabia. And Trump apparently called the prime minister of Iraq and said, thank you for doing this, to kind of basically help make sure that Soleimani would be there so that we could kill him. In a country we invaded, against a country that we're technically not at war with. Like, we are not at war with Iran. We may have a lot of propaganda against them, but
and economic warfare.
No one's fucking declared war against Iran.
Well, technically, we haven't declared war on most of the countries, if not all of the countries that we're at war with currently. But yeah, and this is an important thing to note too, that while Soleimani is known for fighting and literally like being out there fighting, not just like your stereotypical general who's like 30 miles behind the front lines, he was not only known for fighting.
Trump's on the front line, right? He's out there. I saw him with his automatic rifle over his shoulder the other day. I think he was headed to I believe it was Duma.
So he's not only known for fighting on the front lines, but also for his diplomacy. This is somebody who, for instance, went to Moscow.
I'm not familiar with that word. What is that? Diplomacy.
He went to Moscow to talk to the Russians about intervening in Syria. He's backed the Houthi movement in an attempt to get the Saudi Arabian government to back down. So he's known also for that.
I just want to clarify, from a genocide they're committing in Yemen. So this is what we should be doing.
That we are also committing in Yemen, by the way.
This is what we should be doing, is stopping genocide.
And this is the point that I highlight in my show as well, is that Soleimani was a threat in two ways. One, he made the U.S. look bad.
Yep.
Because he was fighting the forces that we not only created but kept going, because as Lee, you and I have both highlighted for many years now, if you want a war on terror, you got to keep finding terrorists. So, whack-a-mole is no fun if the moles aren't there. So...
Right, so it's funny how right when ISIS is getting defeated, we tend to back off or, start funneling arms to them. Or
yeah, like when the Kurds have them on lock, literally we're just like, oh, well, look at what's happening with the Turks, and oh dear. But anyway, so Soleimani was not only making us look bad in that sense by beating back Daesh, but also... he made us look bad because he was really a key player in trying to create peace and solidarity in the region. So, you have Iraqis. He was commanding Iraqi forces, the grassroots people's, what is it called? The People's Mobilization Units in Iraq. He was commanding Iraqi soldiers, and this, flies in the face of of U.S. propaganda that dictates that Iraq hates Iran and Iran hates Iraq. And not only that, but as you mentioned, he was holding information and a letter that had ways for Iran, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia to get along. And this completely destroys our plans for continuing to destabilize this region. He proposed a threat on several different levels.
And it also, here's the other thing, is like, even if you're a Republican, even if you're a Trump lover, this was the stupidest thing you could do also. Even if you are taking a different tack than you and I would, even if you don't give a fuck about innocent civilians, even if you don't think the U.S. should not be involved in other countries, even if you're that bizarre human being, you still shouldn't like what just happened because it is fucking stupid. It is tactically stupid. Does it make America more secure? Are we more secure now that the entire Iranian country and Iraqi country have been all the people basically united in their hatred of us?
I mean, you should, for folks who haven't seen, go look at aerial shots of the funeral procession. I mean, it's millions of people, and folks from Iran or that have reported on Iran have said that we've never seen people coming together on this level before. So this is huge. And also, I'm kind of pulling from a not kind of, I am. Excuse any flubs here and and etc. I'm a bit jet lagged. But so this comes from a current affairs article that was written by Nathan J. Robinson, and it talks about how to avoid swallowing war propaganda. And one of the things that he writes is that showing that or suggesting that Soleimani was a war criminal doesn't mean that you can unilaterally kill him anyway. And he writes, Henry Kissinger is a war criminal. So is George W. Bush. But they should be captured and tried in a court, not bombed from the sky. So even if you accept the bullshit that he's a war criminal, which, by the way, he's not, that still doesn't mean that you can just fucking kill someone. Right. That's not how it works. And then, he also points out that the framing of this is in that way totally wrong. Because, for instance, he's quoting another outlet that wrote, quote, leaving aside the moral questions, is this good strategy? Well, what the fuck does that mean? You can't leave aside the moral questions, right, or not to mention the international law questions of whether this is an okay move. That's absolutely bullshit. As if the only thing that matters is U.S. strategy.
Well, and that's what our mainstream media is doing right now. Is they're largely, I mean, there are some exceptions here and there, but they're largely ignoring the moral questions. You don't hear them saying, hey, we just fucking slaughtered a high-level general that was completely illegal internationally and immoral, and 6 other people, I believe, died in the strike. Right. Not to mention we killed 1 million people in Iraq to invade there, and the people dying in Iran right now from our economic sanctions, similar to the people dying in Venezuela from our economic sanctions. None of that is discussed in your mainstream media. It's just a discussion of, well, Trump shouldn't have done this, and without consulting Congress.
Yeah, and the other point that Robinson talks about in this article is seeing things from the opposite side. So he writes, if you're going to understand the world clearly, you have to kill your nationalistic emotions, which I absolutely agree with. But he makes the point that, for instance, we engineered the overthrow of the Iranian government.
Right.
Like, not that long ago.
And a lot of people often remember these things.
Right. Within the lifetimes of people that are still alive today.
Yeah.
So imagine,
in the 70s.
So imagine if that were if that were the case here. And also, Popular Resistance wrote this in their recent newsletter that talks about, well, so there's been some mutterings about how Soleimani killed a U.S. contractor. By the way, I'm not saying that doesn't matter, but that's a U.S. contractor versus millions of people that we have killed in that region. So even still, that's not a fair analysis. But hypothetically, let's say that that's true. All right, let's look at it from the opposite side. Hypothetically, let's say that the Chinese government was responsible for killing a U.S. contractor, and then the response was, or I'm sorry, if we were responsible for killing a Chinese contractor, and then the response was that China just killed a bunch of our generals.
Like our Secretary of State or something. Where the head of the Joint Chiefs was drone bombed by China while he was visiting Mexico.
Yeah.
Like, it would be...
Would you think that that's a sensical response? Like, that's completely fucking looped. And again, not strategically. I don't even give a flying fuck about that. I'm just talking about, like, morally, ethically, logically and based on international law, that's fucking insane.
Yeah, it really is. And you mentioned the history and how, countries tend to remember when, even 30 or 40 years ago, you overthrew their leadership and sent their country into like a fucking death spiral of dictatorship and shit like that. They tend to remember these past events. And my favorite example of that, which is never, and I mean fucking never discussed in your mainstream media, despite all of the attention given to this country, is North Korea. You don't think that a few people in North Korea remember that we slaughtered a quarter to a third of their population? Not of their military, of their population. Like, how does that is deeply ingrained in the cultural memory of what they think of America, and they think of, what our possibilities are, what we might do. And it's similar with Iran. But so moving on to some other points here, and I think you've made some great points on the propaganda that we're getting from our mainstream media, how they reframe these debates. And even though I will say it is nice, this is how pathetic our mainstream media is, that you have to grab onto these little straws. You're like, ooh, that was slightly reasonable of them. They don't seem to be simply saying yay, 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 rah, 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 America. Because I think they are willing to push back against Trump to some degree, they are instead saying, well, tactically, this is a bad idea, although Soleimani deserves to die. That's what they've been saying. Now, that is straight-up propaganda, but it is a lighter form of propaganda than what we've seen in the past, like with the Iraq War and WMD. It was all rah, 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 you got to get behind America, love it or leave it. And so there is, and I think largely that's thanks to alternative media and people like us and people like Gray Zone and stuff. It's like the reality is out there, so it's tougher for like CNN to just go, imminent attack happening, oh my goodness, it was going to happen, thank goodness they took him out. Because people can go, wait, that's fucking not true. That's simply not true.
True, but I still hear, and of course I know that you recognize this too, but I still hear the war drums beating heavily, because I feel like what this is doing is that it's greasing us up to accept it. Like, oh, well, that wasn't strategic, but also let's spend half an hour just talking about how horrible this person is or was. Right. And this is another point, and I keep pulling from this article, but it's an amazing article. It's a bit of a long read, but it's so worth it in Current Affairs. But he also writes, what about 5 minutes ago, when nobody in the U.S. knew who Soleimani was, and now he's public enemy number one. Right. And everyone's talking about like, oh my gosh, do you remember how much you hated that guy? Remember how evil he was? And then he writes, no, I don't remember, because people like Ben Shapiro only just discovered their hatred for Soleimani once they had to justify his murder. Right. And that's the thing. It's like, that's the creeping war fever here. It's the idea that, oh no, we're not going to be that overt about it. We're going to gently talk to you about how evil this guy was, so that first of all you realize that it was justified, even though it wasn't ideal. Trump shouldn't have done that. Bad man, slap on the wrist. But ultimately, Soleimani, like every other Iranian, is fucking evil. So we have to, we have to rally as Americans. So it's like, it's this creeping bullshit. So I still feel like it's very, it's very important that we combat that narrative. And I guess I'm more of a hard ass when it comes to.
Well, I'm not disagreeing with you. I do believe it lays a groundwork for continued war with these countries. But I think this is different than what we heard 20 years ago, and I think there's a reason for that. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that they're doing a great job, and I'm not saying I'm not saying that they're opposed to war. And by the way, the weapons contractors' stocks went sky high this past week. They shot up because, yay, it's time to make some money by murdering some people. Very exciting, folks. Get in now. Mm-hmm. Get in now. Limited time offer. Invest in Boeing and Lockheed Martin, kill some children, and you can make a fuckload of money, all right? But you got to get on the ground floor, okay? I want to go over a little bit of history real quick, recent history, in that Iran was in this nuclear deal, and they were abiding by it.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I don't know why America and Israel and a handful of countries are the only ones allowed to have nuclear bombs. That seems kind of ridiculous. But they were abiding by it. And then Donald Trump, without basically any reasoning, just pulls out of this nuclear deal. Now, instead of, even though we have illegally pulled out of this deal, rather than Iran just saying, all right, deal's off, fuck this, we're enriching uranium and creating a nuclear bomb, they tried to continue the deal with the European nations and others that had signed on to this thing because they wanted sanctions relief,
Right.
this economic war that we've had them under, and because, as Kiriakou and some others have said, they didn't want a nuclear bomb. They don't view it as legitimate to murder millions of people with a single strike that have nothing to do with a battle. And the Iranian government, I'm speaking of their military aims, largely don't want a nuclear bomb other than for deterrence, to stop the United States from, destroying them and threatening them. But so they stick with this deal. They try and pressure the European countries to force the U.S. to stop these economic sanctions, and I really should say economic war, because it is killing people. And like I always say, it kills the children, it kills the old, it kills the poor. It doesn't kill the rich and well-off. These sanctions are designed to hurt the poorest people in a country so that they, quote-unquote, stand up against their government. But it kills a lot of people. 40,000 in Venezuela in the past couple of years we've killed with our sanctions. And so they kept with the deal until now. Until Trump assassinates this top-level general, and they would slowly backing off the deal as a threat to Europe so that Europe would stand up. But now they've said they're pulling out completely. That's one unintended consequence of the military-industrial complex's idiocy in this. Another is the vote in Iraqi parliament, right?
Well, yeah. So as I mentioned, Soleimani was not just in charge of Iranian forces; he was also leading Iraqi forces against Daesh and other terrorist groups like Al Qaeda that we've helped create and fund in the region. And what happened soon after the assassination is the Iraqi parliament voted to expel all American troops and submit a UN complaint against the United States for violation of sovereignty. And this is not something that means that we're going to dismantle our literal cities that we've built in Iraq to occupy their country, but this is a big move. And I mentioned this in my show this week as well, how, the UN's writing letters about everything from Assange being tortured to all this other shit, and it doesn't have any any results that you can really, any tangible results.
The UN has been made like toothless.
Right. However, let's also keep in mind that Soleimani was carrying a letter when he was murdered. And that's not to say that he was murdered because he had a letter, but it's also to say that these actions are not meaningless. They're just not enough. We need more people and more countries to get on board because the U.S. is not accountable to anybody. But if enough countries stand up as a literal and figurative, a political blockade, the empire has to respond. The empire doesn't have to respond to the UN because the UN can't do fuck all about it. The US doesn't have to respond when Iraq says, get the fuck out of our country, because the US is like, you guys have been saying that for almost a decade, or more than a decade. Sorry, almost 2 decades now. We don't fucking care. But if enough countries, looking at you, Europe, grow a fucking spine. If enough countries create that political blockade, then the U.S. has to respond. And that's, I think where these kind of actions are creating a domino effect. And so I do think that more countries are going to respond. It's just a question of whether places like Europe, places like China and Russia and other places around the world that were part of the JCPOA in particular have the ability and the spine to really stand up and say, you know what, this is fucking absurd. You guys can't keep doing this.
Yeah, we definitely need that. We need a lot of other countries need to stand up to the U.S. And, part of the reason that the U.S. has gone after Iran specifically, and I'm going to get more into the other reasons as well on Redacted tonight, but part of the reason was because they were part of a block of countries. I mean, I guess in some ways they still are part of a block of countries that were not abiding by U.S. imperialism. And it was termed BRICS: Brazil, Russia, Iran, China, Korea, and I think Syria. I can't remember what the S was, but Brazil is now out because they have a fucking fascist leader. Russia, basically, once the BRICS nations started to get more powerful, I mean, they started discussing currency changes and things like that. We saw the neo-McCarthyism come in, so now it's Russia's the new fucking Drago from Rocky, and then you have Iran. Oh yeah, that's right. Every time I mention him,
He's Swedish.
I'm sorry. He was in Rocky. He was an evil Russian. We've been through this.
No.
We have been through this.
And the guy that plays the Russian prime minister or whatever in House of Cards is Danish. So I'm just saying, leave the fucking Scandinavians alone. Leave them out of this McCarthyist bullshit. We want no part of it.
Are you finished? Oh!
Okay. Insider note, we don't consider the Finns part of our crew.
Part of our crew. We don't hang with Finns.
Them and their excelling schools and education and their fucking badass female prime minister. We are not. They are not part of our crew.
You want to have your Danish and eat it too, don't you? Listen, you started this.
There's not enough wine for these jokes.
What the fuck was I saying? Why did you have to interrupt with that? All right, so the BRICS nations. Okay, so then China. We've seen continued, hatred of China being put through propaganda. Korea, obviously, that continues, and then Syria, we have dismantled. Assuming
it's
that
South Africa.
It's not Syria. Damn
No.
it. I was actually going through them earlier in my mind, and I was like, "What the fuck is the S? Is the S Syria?" I was like, anyway, with Syria, we've got other issues with. But
yes.
But anyway, we have got our ruling elite, and again, this isn't a crazy analysis of mine. This is very obvious, but it's like you'll never hear it on your mainstream media. They hardly even mention the BRICS nations, but that was becoming a major power competition to the U.S. hegemony. A worldwide ownership was this list of nations. And our ruling elite have systematically gone through and either created propaganda that says these are the most evil countries in the world, or fully undermined them and borderline created war with them. And then there's other countries we hate for other reasons, but this is not over. We're going to keep going. America's going to keep going after BRICS nations because we want our hegemony. We want to own the world. And this empire is fading. And when you have a fading empire, I believe the term Chris Hedges used was it vomits up a Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a continuation of the ongoing empire and completely criminal enterprise that has run this country, and Donald Trump is just the next step in it. It's not that he's not evil and sociopathic and idiotic and all those things, narcissistic, megalomaniac, fucking childish, all of those things. It's just our media, even when they say those things, are acting like he is above and beyond something new that has never ever been before. Instead, this is just one step further than the hatred and destruction and sanctions that have been pushed against Iran for decades. He is one step more against all these nations and all this criminal activity and corruption.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another Hedges quote that speaks very much to this moment is, when you speak to the world in the language of violence, don't be surprised when they speak it back to you. And I think that this is one of those moments when we, as children of this empire, as residents of this empire, have to really reckon with, because of course, one of the things that always comes up when we talk about foreign policy is people are like, well, how does that help me pay for healthcare? How does that help me like put food on my table? And so like a lot of people, the anti-war movement has slumped significantly in this country, partially, because of things like the draft not being around anymore, but also just because people have gotten into such dire situations where they're working 3 jobs. If they're going to go to a protest, it's going to be because, they're going on strike because they can't afford their food, not because of a war that's happening thousands of miles away. And in theory, I get it. But it's absolutely vital that we build solidarity, bridges of solidarity between people in our country and the countries that we are wreaking havoc in. And I'm reminded, and I know that I've brought this up on the show before, but I'm reminded of the Marjani Satrapi quote. She's an Iranian filmmaker who pointed out, quite rightly, that what separates you and me is much smaller than what separates us from our governments.
I know. I think that's a big point here.
Yeah, and also and not only that point, but also the idea that imperialism is also a home game. This is not something that just happens over there. Imperialism affects every part of our lives, from not being able to pay for things like healthcare, to the fact that we live in many communities live in an occupied territory with a militarized police force thanks to the military budgets. We've got
right, and a lot of this comes down to money, and when you have all the money being given over to the military, it doesn't go to your people. It doesn't go to help people. It doesn't go to health. We have a economy based on death rather than based on life and sustainability.
And another aspect of this, just recently, basically like a day ago, on the 5th of January, Iranians and Iranian Americans were detained at the Peace Arch border crossing in Blaine, Washington, after having been to Vancouver. And basically and many of them are many of the people who were detained are U.S. citizens as well. And this smacks very much of the internment camps that we saw with the Japanese, and how that started with, them targeting Japanese Americans in places like San Francisco and gradually pushing them out of their homes and their businesses. And this is where it starts, right? And we've had these conversations about what's happening in the borderlands, what's happening with immigrants from South America, from Central America. But this is also happening with regards to Iranian Americans. And I know that I've heard similar stories with folks from Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria. This is a growing issue, and this is something that is very, very clearly happening at home.
Now hold on. I don't understand. Mike Pompeo said today and yesterday that one of the reasons they did this assassination was to protect Muslims. Are you saying that's incorrect?
I honestly don't even have a response to that.
He literally said he was doing that. They did this they were protecting Muslims. He literally, like, that shit came out of his fucking face.
So one instance in this, I'm getting this information from the Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR, CAIR. And they reported that Crystal, a 24-year-old American citizen, was allegedly detained and interrogated for more than 10 hours at the border crossing before being released.
It's just straight up racist.
And she said, quote, "The vast majority of people being held were American citizens. We kept asking why we were being detained and asked questions that had nothing to do with our reason for traveling. And then we're told, quote, 'I'm sorry, this is just the wrong time for you guys.'" Like,
God, you know what this sounds like? Is right after 9/11.
Right, but it's like, it's just the wrong time to be Iranian. Sorry, sucks for you. So it's racism, it's Islamophobia, it's this is the kind of shit.
Dude, the moment I wasn't as politically informed then, but I was 21 years old, and the moment I was saw how easily Americans can be led into this bullshit racism. I was performing stand-up comedy. I wasn't doing political comedy back then, so I was just doing my, observational stuff. And I'm 21, I'm moving to New York, and I have a gig at a Baltimore comedy club. And the headliner goes up there, and he makes a joke about the Indian, this is right after 9/11, and he makes a joke about the Indian cashier at a 7-Eleven. and about how he has the red dot on his head, and that's for the sniper rifle to take him out. And the crowd kind of goes, ooh, like they didn't laugh. Not many people laughed, and it was kind of a groan. And then the comedian shifts gears and goes, oh, really? You're going to groan at that? They fucking fly planes into our buildings and kill 3,000 people, and you're going to groan at that joke? And by the end of that rant, he had the whole crowd turn around, and they were all cheering for him. And I'm sitting there off the side of the room thinking, the fucking Indian flew planes into the buildings? What the fuck are you talking about? An Indian American who works at 7-Eleven attacked us on 9/11. Like, it was so fucking mind-boggling to me. And I guess that guy is brown skin. Brown skin people hurt us. Like,
yeah. Oh my gosh, what's his name? Brother Ali put it in one of his songs. The government's the addict with $1 billion a week kill brown people habit.
Oh, goddamn Uncle Sam. What's it?
Uncle Sam, goddamn.
Uncle Sam, goddamn. That song is one of the best in the world. Anybody out there listening, you never heard of Uncle Sam, goddamn by Brother Ali? Fucking go watch the YouTube video. It's incredible.
Yeah, it really is. But I think, but yeah, I mean, this is something that we have to make these connections, and of course, we should be outraged just at the like at this on its face, right? And not just be concerned about how this affects us. But I also understand that humans are selfish, Americans even more so. We're programmed that way. And so for the sake of arguments, for the sake of, doing outreach for people in order to build the anti-war movement, you got to have some arguments in your pocket that speak to people who are programmed to only think of their bubble. And in that case, these are some powerful arguments. The fact that you're not getting money to the things that you need, to your family, to your community, because that money's going to build a fucking green zone in Baghdad. That you're not.
It is green.
Not in the senses that matter. And that imperialism is a home game, that it's coming back in violent droves because you can't contain that shit outside of the fake borders of our country. There are so many really quite selfish reasons to be very concerned with these escalations of violence. And of course, as I mentioned, just on the face of it, that war is, a war with Iran is something that you can't even fucking fathom. Iran is not Iraq.
Iran has a powerful military. They've got 80 million people, whereas Iraq had 30 million. There's a million ways that this is very different, and that
not to mention that
any war with Iran would be incredibly harmful to the U.S., even if you don't give a shit about innocent civilians in Iran.
Not to mention that because of where Iran is located, they control the flow of, I think it's either a third or a fourth of the world's oil. So, and hey, I'm no fucking fan of oil, but again, there's a selfish reason to back the fuck off. And it's very clear that the more that we dive into the Middle East, the worse we do economically and, of course, politically as well. So, yeah, I mean, these are...
And can I just make this one last point on if there were to be even a minor conflict with Iran? Don't you think it would look just like Afghanistan? Mm-hmm. Well, but much worse. At the very least, it would look just like Afghanistan, which we just found out in the Washington Post. I mean, we knew it for years, but this was the proof. The Afghanistan papers showed us it's been an utter disaster. They didn't even know from day one. They, quote unquote, didn't know who the bad guys were. Like, Afghanistan shows you what happens when billions and literally trillions of dollars is dumped into an economy of death, weapons of murder. The Pentagon is the world's largest mass murder organization. And that is what that's what they're employed to do, and that is what they did in Afghanistan, and it didn't matter the fact that they didn't know what the fucking objective was. They weren't even sure. They just pumped money into killing. I mean, it's so incredible that, here's the thing. Washington Post, for, the first time in 40 years, did some good journalistic reporting, and where the fuck is it? Where is it? That story was a blip. It lasted 2 days. CNN did one 10-minute report on it, and now they think they've covered the fact that the longest war in the U.S. history, in our history, is just utter catastrophe.
Yeah, and to that point as well, I also just want to add one more of those arguments that you can keep in your back pocket when you're talking to folks about the anti-war movement. The U.S. military is the largest consumer of fossil fuels in the world. It's equal to 140 fucking countries. So if you actually want to talk about a Green New Deal, which by the way doesn't go far enough, but that's a different conversation. If you want to talk about a sustainable future where you can fucking breathe, where you have water, then you have to talk about the U.S. military, and you have to talk about escalations like what we're doing in Iran. That has to be part of the conversation. And with that, I also want to let folks know that an international day of action against U.S. wars has been called for January 25th. And you can find out more about that via Answer Coalition as well as Code Pink. They've called for that day to be another day of action after this past weekend.
I don't think we've given Answer Coalition's website in a long time. Is it answercoalition.org maybe?
I don't know, but if you Google Answer Coalition, you'll find it.
Don't promote Google.
Start page.
AnswerCoalition.org.
DuckDuckGo, Answer Coalition.
AnswerCoalition.org. AnswerCoalition.org.
I believe in people's capacity to find things on the internets.
For the love of God, let me say AnswerCoalition.org.
I also just want to read this last quote because
this is really got to be it. I'm sick of you giving informed points on this topic.
And this is the end quote from the Current Affairs article on war propaganda. Says, quote, "What I really mean here is listen to the dissidents. They will not appear on television. They will be smeared and treated as lunatics."
Well, okay, there's one channel we might get on.
Do you mind?
Sorry.
Now I have to start over. Quote, "What I really mean here is listen to the dissidents. They will not appear on television. They will be smeared and treated as lunatics. But you need them if you're going to be able to resist the absolute barrage of misinformation or to hear yourself think over the pounding war drums. Times of war fever can be wearying because there is just so much aggression against dissent that your resistance wears down. That's why community is so necessary. You may watch people who previously seemed reasonable develop a pathological bloodlust. Find the people who see clearly and stick close to them."
That was beautiful, and I agree with all that, except we might be on TV. It's just there aren't many channels, and it's rare, but a couple of us get on TV.
Okay, but that addition to that sentence doesn't flow well. It's not nearly as poetic and eloquent as what I just read.
I agree.
Editorializing,
and in general, 99% of the time, you're right. They won't be on TV. They will be smeared and attacked and censored, and all of those things have happened to us. And for those reasons, we're looking for your support, not just with sharing our show.
Nice segue.
But listen, I'm Segway King over here, all right?
not that ring.
Not the tiny little carts. I'm the Segway King. And then you hear me slowly drive off. This is my world. I just allow you to live in it. And then it dies like 5 feet away.
Anybody have a charger?
Plug me in for a moment. Okay, so, we need your help sharing the episode, telling people about Common Censored. We're not funded by ads or sponsors or anything else. Patreon.com/Common Censored is where you can be a part of the magic. Nailed it. I was hoping you'd join in with something. Where you can be a part of the magic. Patreon.com/Common Censored. Honestly, if you feel like you're getting $1 worth or more out of this episode,
or just that little ditty,
if you feel like you just got $1 out of that ditty, then go to patreon.com/Common Censored and become a member. Also, my book it's out for pre-order. It ships this month, so basically you will be ordering it for the next couple of weeks. Isn't it exciting? It will get to you soon. Oh man, the ditties are getting heavy in here.
The jet lag is getting heavy, so the ditties are going to keep coming.
The ditties are going to keep coming. Yeah, so you can pre-order that at leecampbook.com. I have live shows that are book tour / stand-up comedy, all of it combined into one little Q&A in there. Eleanor will be opening on some of these shows. Chris Mohan, another great comedian, will be there at some of them. Philadelphia, Dallas, Austin, Flagstaff, Arizona, Montreal, Columbus, Ohio, Toronto, Canada. That's redactedtour.com. I know, some of them I was saying country, some of them I wasn't. Redactedtour.com is where you can find out the cities, but also vote for your city to be added. All of Eleanor's stuff, including her awesome book, which we haven't mentioned in a while. We should be.
Well, 'cause it's old.
That's a great book, though. It
Thank
doesn't age because it's spoken
That's
word, so it's not like yesterday. Donald Trump, bliggity blue. Artkillingapathy.com is where you can get all of her stuff and watch her videos and act out and everything else. Common Censored at protonmail.com is our email address. You can send us topics, ideas. Thank you all for the comments. We've gotten many lovely comments from you recently. Common Censored at protonmail.com. I saw a lively conversation on the YouTube comments about the Venus Project. Maybe we can discuss that sometime. Thank you guys for getting involved and leaving comments and reviewing us on iTunes. That helps a lot because then they tell people about us. And last thing, to join our email list, text the word censored to 33777. All right, let's keep going. You mentioned climate change in the military-industrial complex. So speaking of climate change, and we're going to keep this short because both of us are talking about it in our shows, but Australia, over 12 million acres have burned. There are massive fires that are creating their own weather systems, and this is what I've been trying to say is like, it's climate catastrophe is not, we keep talking about it like 10 years from now, 5 years from now. It is here. Mm-hmm. So many people, some of you that may be regular listeners of the podcast are, some of you live in Australia. Like, some of you are experiencing this. Some of you live in California where the blackouts happened. People I work with on the production of my book, I emailed about some of the something about the book cover, and he goes, "Oh, I'll get to it soon. Our power's out right now because they were in the blackouts, the rolling blackouts in California due to the fires." This climate catastrophe is here. It's fucking here.
Yeah, it's here, and it really highlights how fragile our societies are and how we're not prepared for this at all. Because, as you mentioned, Lee, we keep talking about it like it's something that's going to happen. But even in this country, having been down to Louisiana as well, that's another place where they lose a football field worth of land every 45 minutes. That's hard to even fucking...
To what, floodwaters?
Yeah, that's hard to even, comprehend. And a lot of that is climate change, and it's also driven by the fact that wetlands and marshes have been absolutely destroyed by the fossil fuel industries. So climate refugees and climate chaos is not something... These are not things that will happen. They are happening. They have been happening, and it's vital that we treat it like it is here and now, and that we not only prepare for it in terms of policy but also in terms of our communities, and really find ways to build solidarity in alternatives that are outside of the capitalist framework, where we rely on each other and our autonomous decisions, as opposed to waiting for government to make the right call, because they won't.
Yeah, and the government is fucking laughable in Australia. It's very similar to the United States. The prime minister is, a coal executive, and he's acting like this has nothing to do with climate change. But this is climate change, and it is our lives over the next several years are going to become increasingly just centered on climate change, dealing with it, changing the way we live, figuring out what the responses are, figuring out how to survive. And it's inescapable. I mean, you can run around and say it's not happening, but when your power's out, or you're a refugee fleeing forest fires or floods, you can't. You're welcome to pretend that that's not connected to anything else, and it's just God's whoopsie daisy. But when you're dealing with those, all of a sudden you're in the middle of it, whether you believe it or not.
Mm-hmm. And part of that, in this same vein, another important thing that's been brought up is how we think of our relationship to nature. Right, we have this sort of Judeo-Christian perspective on nature, which is we control.
I have a sexual one, actually. Relationship.
Well, that's okay. Well, that's between you and those hopefully consenting bushes. But there's we have
donkeys, please.
Okay, that's a different story. I'm not getting near that. So there's this feeling that we are above nature, right? We have the right to use it and abuse it, and it'll always just kind of rebound, and we can keep oppressing it and destroying it, and it'll be fine, right? But there's the reality of the situation, and this is what's powerful and interesting and important, is that science really lends itself to a more indigenous perspective on our place in nature. The fact that we are part of these ecosystems. We are not above them. We are not outside of them. We are part of them. We are intricately linked to the destruction that we are creating. We are destroying ourselves as we are destroying, millions of acres of land and hundreds of millions of species. That is us that we are also destroying. And so a powerful point here is to recognize also how Australia has completely railroaded their indigenous peoples there, and how we continue to do the same here in the Americas. One of the a recent story that's really ongoing at the moment that I covered on my show is the Wet'suwet'en fight up in Canada, where basically the most recent news is that the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs of all 5 clans have issued an eviction notice to the Coastal GasLink pipeline company. And to give you just a little bit of, I'm not going to get too far into it because we're going to wrap here in a minute, but basically they've sent an eviction notice to this pipeline company because they say that the pipeline company does not have the right to be on their land, and they have sovereignty over their land, and they want to protect the land, air, and water from a fucking pipeline, which by definition destroys everything in its fucking path. And they
have the ability to do that because they don't have to abide by the Canadian government, right? They have their own land.
Yeah, supposedly. And, Trudeau...
Supposedly.
Right, and Trudeau has talked a lot about reconciliation and how we need to respect the Indigenous peoples, which, again, just speaks to the fact that he is the Obama of Canada, where it's like he's a pretty face and an eloquent speech on top of a neoliberal, horrific colonialist policy, which is exactly what we're seeing in Wet'suwet'en territory up in Canada. And so the Wet'suwet'en people are standing strong against this project. And as of just a few... Well, basically, as of right now, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the RCMP, are circling the Wet'suwet'en territory with helicopters. They're patrolling the area, and police vehicles are becoming more. They're showing up in more places after this eviction notice was sent out by the Wet'suwet'en chiefs. So this is an ongoing issue right now. We're recording this on Monday, January 6th at around 9 p.m. Eastern. So definitely, this is ongoing and this is changing relatively quickly. So I definitely recommend that people stand in solidarity with that. Also this week, there are...
Where do they find it?
I'll get to that in 1 second.
Okay.
Also this week, the Wet'suwet'en people have asked for solidarity actions to be held across not just Canada, but the U.S. and internationally. And so they're asking for people to create, actions and upload messages of solidarity and help in whatever ways they can. And you can find out more about that. I'll include this link in our show notes as well by going to unistoten.camp. That's unistoten.camp.
Nice. And speaking of standing strong, do you want to talk about the Fang ice shutdown trial?
Yeah, so I'll just wrap with this. And I talk.
You wrote a rap? I'm looking forward to this.
I talk about this on my show as well, but
All right, we get it. You are a very hard worker, okay?
Well, no, I feel like I'm basically just repeating my show here, so no.
That's all right. It's important shit.
So basically, the co-founder of the Fang Collective, Sherry Andre, is going on trial tomorrow. Actually, is the first day of their trial, January 7th and 8th, the New Bedford District Court, for their participation in an action at the Bristol County House of Corrections. This action was held in solidarity with people in ICE detention who launched a hunger strike to demand better conditions at the facility. Sherry is facing jail time for being a part of this action. And so could really use support. Obviously, if you're in the area of New Bedford, they'd really appreciate seeing you there. But other than that, you can go to shutdownicenow.org and see more ways that you can support Sherry in this trial.
And can I just say that no matter, like, our mainstream media, right, they were all against Trump. They were against or they claimed to be against what was going on with ICE, what was going on with children in cages. Even the Democrats did some show of support in the Congress, with, holding up posters of kids in cages as if they cared. And so they run around acting like they care about that. But then when someone actually does something like this, does an ICE shutdown action, does some other action to interrupt the flow of business that is this crime against humanity, where's the mainstream media? Where's the coverage of this? Where's the talk of this? Where's the support? Are they, supporting these people that are following through the next step of what you should want from a human being? If you hear MSNBC say, oh, Trump has children in cages. Well, if you're a fucking awesome human being, your next move should be, well, how can I fucking interrupt that?
Yeah.
And then the mainstream media and the Democrats and your ruling elite, they all fucking go home and pack up and act like they're not even going to, they don't want to be anywhere fucking near an actual action to stop this stuff.
Well, and again, it's the threat of a good example. It's the fact that people, and this is part of the message that Shutdown ICE Now is putting out there, that we want to make it clear that these communities will not just be bystanders to the collaborations with ICE and to this violence. And when that is made clear in a very physical, when you put your body on the line in a very vocal way, then all of a sudden the full force of the law will be thrown at you. Whereas, circling back to the beginning of our show, when it has to do with international law, we're like, who cares? What the fuck is the legality in these situations? It's all about strategy. And as an activist, when it's about saving the world or saving people's lives, I'm like, yeah, fuck it if it's legal or not. It's about justice and it's about saving people's lives. But that is the complete opposite of what the U.S. empire does, and these instances of where people like Sherry Andre are being threatened with jail time because they stand up for people's basic human rights, then all of a sudden the rule of law matters so much. So of course, this is a system built on hypocrisies and imperialism, white supremacy, and colonialism, and we need more people, more nations, more people, more grassroots efforts to really stand up strong and fight against this in all aspects of these movements, be that anti-war, climate change, immigration rights, all of these, because all of these are connected in the same system.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. You keep this show going. Go to patreon.com/commoncensored, or else this podcast will cease to exist, because it all comes down to you. Also, my book is out soon. You can pre-order at leecampbook.com. Lots of live touring coming up at redactedtour.com. artkillingapathy.com has all of Eleanor's stuff. And I think that's all I'm going to do for right now.
I think that's...
You got anything else?
No, I'm done.
All right. Keep fighting, everybody.
Act out.